everyone knew that it was going to be what was outside the windows in the spinner. It got to the point where those shots grew and became more and more vast. We were using anything we could to represent buildings.
No budget for something, you can't build something else, so you borrow it. God, you just throw it in there if it looks okay in the distant and lots of smoke, and hey, let's do it. Just put it in there.
We grabbed other things that weren't even buildings. Spaceships from another movie with a bunch of antenna and stuff glued on it. And we took the flying buttress wings on the pyramid itself. We would take those because they were all separate and bring them together and create a building. There's even a kitchen sink in the back of one of them with a bunch of stuff glued on it.
There were some purpose-built buildings that were different from this building set. The precinct tower was the main one. And they were sort of off-scale and forced perspective scale things, and they were really just a lot of fantasy shapes. And to save time, we just thought, well, let's start with something, and we started with the roof.
Once again, it was a hybrid building that was constructed out of pieces that were left lying around. The top of it is actually a piece from Close Encounters Revised Edition, where Richard Dreyfuss goes into the mothership and the ceiling lifts off, and that was the ceiling piece that eventually became the top of the police station.
What most people are amazed at, a lot of those sets were no bigger than 12 feet by 12 feet.
You know, we weren't shooting on very large stages, and this one shot spiraling down onto the roof of the precinct tower, and we wanted to get the camera up, and the camera simply wouldn't boom up that high either. So we brought the whole miniature down to the camera basically by tilting it onto an oblique angle on its side so that the camera could reach high enough to get that aerial shot and be far enough back from the tops of the building at the same time.
That Bradbury atrium shot, I was there that evening with, we went out to do that plate, and the crew was so busy and so difficult, and every piece of equipment was used, and there were cable running everywhere, so that when they left the interior of the Bradbury building, it was dark, it was turned off.
And we didn't have time to light that whole thing, looking up with the staircases and the elevator and up to the skylight and everything.
So we found an angle for that shot. The camera was set up, and Douglas said, "Just fire when I say so." And I didn't know what he was going to do. He marched through the building and illuminated the building in pieces. So we'd take the lens cap off, and he'd say, "Fire," and he'd fire the strobe, and that amount of exposure with maybe 20 strobes would go to the 8x10.
And that built up the exposure that gave us the upshot. And then John Wash and Company mounted that on a large piece of glass and cut out every one of those windows on a mullion, and then that set right in front of the blimp.
We just put the miniature blimp behind there, and all the light effects coming through the glass were happening right in front of the camera.
The shots looking up through the skylight of the Bradbury building with that blimp going over, it's breathtaking, and I don't think it's been surpassed. I mean, you talk about digital effects looking real or impressive. Those shots of that blimp going overhead, when it's against the miniatures or when it's against that Bradbury skylight, with the shafts of light cutting through, that's inspired. You know, it's just beautiful. In those days, in the case of some of the visual effects work on that movie, we used a process called matte painting. And matte painting is a technique that is used to alter the look of a location or a set in a motion picture, and mostly it is a process that is done in post-production. So it's a combination of painted artwork and live-action photography.
That is even beyond digital. I mean, it's better than anything because it's photography that is shot at the same and exposed at the same time. The matte painting is exposed with the live action photography, so it just is on one piece of film.
So everything I did was kind of a lock-off. And Matt Jurisic, the matte painter, was the brother of Jurisic, the special effects cameraman.
There are a lot of technical issues that go into matte painting to make it look real, and that's where the real matte painting art comes in. Certain colors photograph differently. You have to work in certain densities to produce the effect of depth and everything. And Matthew was a genius at that and could achieve that.
And one of his unique skills was painting for dupe stock. It's a very kind of hard thing to understand, but in order to retain the quality of the matte painting, without the matte painting have to go through generations of duplication, the matte paintings would be added as the last exposure in a completed shot. And so the last exposure would be onto dupe negative, not regular normal cinematic negative. And so Matthew had learned to transpose all these colors in his head and paint matte paintings that he knew green would turn into blue, or orange would turn into red, or yellow would turn into green, or whatever. He could paint these paintings that of themselves looked horrible, but exposed onto the dupe stock just looked like magic.
Of course, what that does is save a generation, going straight from the dupe stock to the screen.
Now, with the paintings themselves, on the case of Blade Runner, they were about 3 by 6 feet in dimension, and you can paint with certain size brushes and loose enough so that the camera doesn't see the brush strokes, and you can use broader strokes and actually get away with it.
Well, there's a kind of a natural blurriness to live action photography of real things. If you actually analyze a motion picture photograph of a building or a horizon or the sky or clouds or whatever, it's always kind of a little bit blurry.
The straight lines aren't really straight. If you go stand next to a pillar or next to the detail or the texture of something is lost. If you paint so sharp and so perfect on something in scale, it comes back that way and it doesn't look real. So it's just the texture and light.
And so there was always a little bit of what we call scumbling or blurring to just soften the edges of the painting, to just make it kind of fall back into the scene.
They're like really not paintings in this film. There's portions of paintings, and some shot might have had 5 or 6 paintings where a section was burnt in that could have been fluorescence. Well, in the Tyrell office, there was a painting for the exterior where the pyramid had to be finished going up. But Ridley wanted to backlight it, of course, and as it should have been. The sunball was directly out. And when you shoot from projection, you never backlight because you're lighting into the beam splitter, and it flares everything and washes it out. So it was a very nervous time.
The whole top third of the frame is a oil matte painting, and passes. The sun was put in on a subsequent machine called COMSI, which we would then take an optical and do a little holdout for the wing of the pyramid and burn it in. And Matt Yuricich, who was doing the painting, would know that, okay, there's a bright light there, so he would work the rest of it out to all fit. But a lot of that was recreated. The pillars were extended up, the ceiling was added in matte painting.
Those shots all came together real well. I really like seeing Sean walk through the sunball because that was all rotoscoped, and it was a very scary shot. It's a beautiful shot. It's my favorite in the film. And you watch the film and you know it's an effect, but you just don't perceive it as an effect. You're in the Tyrell Corporation office and you just fall into it.
Katie Haber gave me a call and said, Ridley wants you to meet Philip Dick, and can he come down and see it?
And I knew what I had, he'd love. So I took him down to see Rushes one day in Santa Monica.
We did a little show and tell. Most of our miniature photography was over at that time, and we drug out a few things and showed him, and he's very polite, nice man. We went through everything. He was very reserved. He asked a few questions. We politely answered, and we went into the screening room. And Katie had said, just tie together 10 minutes of your better shots and run them. So the Vangelis music started to play, the seats started to rumble, and we ran through the thing, the lights came back up. Philip Dick turned around and looked right through the back of my head, and he said, how is this possible? How did this happen? It's like you guys hardwired my brain. That's what I saw when I was writing that story. I don't understand this. How can this happen?
And the compliment came when he said, and by the way, could you run that reel for me again? I want to see it once more. So he asked them to rerun the thing, and I'm told that he enjoyed it very much.
He was completely blown away, could not believe it, that something so serious was happening with his book, and we were friends thereafter.
When I think about it now, in comparison to what we're doing today with computers and everything that Doug did was just amazing.
Everything was really done, because you can feel that when you watch a film. I think when you see a film and it's an in-camera effect, it feels real.
We were all very impressed with the work in Blade Runner, and to this day, I think that it's a high watermark, and the work, for the most part, still stands up very well.
For me, there was an interesting thing that happened because I knew and we knew how few visual effects shots we had in the movie compared to Star Wars or Close Encounters or anybody else's.